education. And I want to welcome you to Lehigh University and to our 11th annual Distinguished Lecture event. What we try to do with these events, the purpose of these events, is to provide a forum for the best and most current research and practice surrounding some of the most pressing issues in education. In the past, we've covered topics such as autism, school leadership, emotional behavioral disorders, and learning difficulties. Each one of these lectures brings together a group of leading professionals in their respective areas, both within the Lehigh University community and other nationally recognized experts in their areas to discuss their work and efforts to improve the education of children and youth. Tonight we have what I believe is a really excellent and timely discussion focused on STEM initiatives, both globally, nationally, and locally, and how efforts in these areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are being transformed through the latest research and the dissemination of that new knowledge. These lectures represent a commitment by the college to children and youth, not only in this area, but nationally, and they wouldn't be possible without the efforts and support of our College Advisory Council that is chaired by Steve Phillis. For over a decade now, that group has provided their support, expertise, and guidance regarding these events, and we're very thankful for what they've done for us. In addition, these events have the full support of the greater Lehigh University community. Our Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Patrick Farrell, who is himself an engineer, and apparently he just told me he's going to tell an engineering story to you tonight. He is here. He joins us tonight to welcome you to Lehigh and tonight's lecture event. Pat.
Thanks, Gary. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to those of you who've been here before, and welcome to those for whom this may be your first time. I'll be brief because you're not here to see me. You're here to hear and learn a little bit more about what the group of experts assembled can tell you about what's going on these days in STEM education. I just wanted to relate a little bit about one experience I've had. As Gary said, I'm an engineer. I've taught engineering for about 25 years at the university level. So a lot of what you know about teaching students and helping students to get really involved in STEM fields is not what I've done. I've done something different. But at the university level, I thought I'd give you a really quick story. One period of my faculty career, a group of faculty and I were working very hard on a project that actually had been kind of given to us indirectly by NSF. And the project was really around the observation that, at least at the university level, at those times, and it's still somewhat true, the attrition rate for women who had entered engineering and then decided they didn't wish to go on in engineering was fairly significant. And of course, there's a great frustration of engineers who can't understand why anyone wouldn't love engineering. How could you not love this? So our project was to figure out, A, what's going on, and B, what, if anything, can one do about it? I won't go through all the details. We started looking at literature, and a lot of literature would talk about both the how engineering is taught, and why that might or might not work well for all different kinds of learners. Very interesting stuff. A little bit about some of the other details about where and when. But slowly but surely we came to the conclusion that at that date everybody was missing what was the real W part of that story, and that was the why. Why would someone be interested in this field? Why would someone want to persist in this field? Why would someone decide, actually, this isn't nearly as interesting as I might have thought it was? So for us, the revelation was to say, focus on the why. And as it turned out, in our case, we were able to figure out quite a bit about why, and quite a bit about why not, and quite a bit about what could we do to enhance the why. And one of the revelations for us, which probably is obvious to the rest of you, but being engineers, it was not terribly obvious to us, was that an awful lot of our students were deciding they didn't want to do engineering because they couldn't see it really connected to the things they wanted to do in the world. Bluntly, they wanted to find a way to make an impact, and they were having a hard time seeing how that was going to happen. And of course, the engineers of the world said, what are you talking about? So there you go. There's the message for us, is what we had thought was so patently obvious and needed no explanation, much less practice, turned out to be patently obscure, and in fact was the core of the success of what we put into place, which was focus on why. The rest can happen. There's better and worse ways to do things, but focus on why. So for us, the experience at the university level was why. I think we'll hear from these experts what the focus might be at other levels and how we can collectively really make change in the STEM education field. Now I'd like to introduce your moderator for the evening. So Professor Tom Hammond, who is the Frank Hook Professor in the College of Engineering, will be your moderator. So can I invite Tom to come?
I'm Tom Hammond, Assistant Professor in the College of Education. Thank you very much to Provost Farrell, and thank you very much for everyone attending with us here tonight, joining us for this program. I'd like to introduce our four panelists for this evening, starting out, please, with Dr. Alec Bodzin. Please enter. Slide, please. Dr. Wiseman is an associate professor in our Comparative International Education program and author of The Employability Imperative, Schooling for Work as a National Project, and he's going to be sharing with us some of his analysis of TIMSS and PISA assessments, Trends in International Mathematics and School Study, and Program for International School Assessments. So, thank you. Next, we'll have Dr. Sharon Lynch from George Washington University. And she is the current president of NARST, a worldwide organization for improving science teaching and learning through research. And she is the principal investigator for opportunity structures for preparation and inspiration. She'll be sharing some of her information on that project with us. So thank you, Dr. Lynch. Next up is Dr. Christine Cunningham, joining us from the Museum of Science, Boston. And she'll be talking to us about engineering as an elementary, a project that she is founder and director of, and she's also a member of the National Academy of Engineering Committee on Standards for K-12 Education. Finally is Dr. Alec Bodzin from Lehigh's College of Education. And he's my colleague in the Teaching, Learning, and Technology program. He's a core faculty member in Lehigh's Environmental Initiative, and he's the primary investigator for promoting spatial thinking with web-based geospatial technologies, active grant with NSF. And he's a primary investigator of environmental literacy and inquiry curriculum, which is freely available on Lehigh's website. All right. I am actually in social studies education, so I get to speak with you for, I think, 10 minutes. You have to be in history class with me for 10 minutes. So, slide, please. We'll talk about American education in a historical perspective. We'll try to make it quick. When looking at American education, historian David Onoff says that the door is always open. There's always an on-ramp. So, slide, please. That's, for example, here are adult learners at a public library in New Jersey who are showing off their certificates from a recently completed computer literacy course. And so adult learners, they are actually also English language learners. That the American education is embedded with the idea of the American dream. Open access, there's always a door, there's always an opportunity for people to enter in, to make a difference and achieve greater economic stature, future prosperity. So when you look backwards at American education, it's indeed encoded into the very origins of our society. So for example, there's a map of Boston, 1722. Slide, please. That's drawn up, and we can see Boston Common there, and then right at the lower edge of it is the school building. That's even as far back as then, that's within the first codes in colonial New England said that all towns need to have a public school within them. And indeed, the first public school was founded in Boston in 1635. It's Boston Latin. Slide, please. All right. And just as Bill Gates is Harvard College's most famous dropout, Boston Latin's most famous dropout of the time is Benjamin Franklin. So, and Boston Latin has the distinction of being founded 1 year before Harvard College. Next slide, please. And as an example of education being an embodiment of American traditions, consider the institution of federalism, division of power between federal and state governments, and then within the state, between the state government and local authorities. So for example, within Pennsylvania, there is a spectacular display of local control in all 501 school districts that we have in Pennsylvania, which are situated within those 26 intermediate units on the map. Next slide, please. We also have institutions of higher education that are internationally recognized and demonstrate cooperation between both public and private spheres. So, for example, we have highly successful state-run universities, next slide, as well as private universities. Next slide, please. And this is, again, an embodiment of the ideals and aspirations of open access, that there's the idea that for everybody who wishes to go to college, there should be an opportunity, and there should be increasingly funding available and supports that are added in. Next slide, please. But to go back to what are the purposes of this from the founding of it, what was it that American education was aimed at? Thank you. Yeah. So consider this New England primer, that as you can see, if you scan through the text, that this is serving not just an educational function in academic instruction, but it's also instructing the student in character developments and sort of non-specified Christian morals. So we can say that for one of the, since its inception, one of the functions of American education has been religious or moral. There's also been a classical function. For example, all applicants to Harvard College were expected to be able to both recite and translate Greek and Latin. And this is a text printed in Cambridge in the 1700s, covering Homer's Iliad in Latin. There's also an economic function in American education, so perhaps best summed up in the apprentice system. So here's a print from William Hogarth showing an apprentice weaver working at the loom under the watchful eye of the master weaver. There's also a civic function to education as well. So for example, Thomas Jefferson in his notes on the state of Virginia says that history, by apprising the people of the past, will enable them to judge of the future, avail them of the experience of other times and other nations, qualify them as judges in the actions and designs of men, and enable them to know ambition under every disguise it may assume, and knowing it, to defeat its views. So very stirring stuff, but he's saying that the purpose of a history education is to prepare civic efficacy, to prepare citizens in this new republic. And as a graduate of the University of Virginia, I think on the back of my diploma it says I must linger, and whenever I'm in the presence of a portrait of Thomas Jefferson, point out that he actually advocated universal public education, but was never in a position to turn that into policy. And finally, we can also point at a function of self-actualization. So this is mostly the reformers who came, interestingly enough, after all the other people that I've referenced. And I'll here pick out Maria Montessori as a personal favorite, but also somebody who has historical resonance with working with special needs students, as an example of education that is aimed not solely at character instruction, not solely at practical life or economic preparation, but mostly at identity formation and developing a fully functioning, integrated adult. So I could name others as well. So Pestalozzi, for example, could also be mentioned into the same category. So among these 5 functions, which ones are in the driver's seat today in American education? And I think we can pretty quickly cross off classical. I don't think there's too many people under 40 in this room who have actually studied Latin, and I don't know about people who are over 40 who can actually remember any Latin or any Greek. I've certainly forgotten whatever little bit I learned. We can also say that in the public sphere, religious and moral instruction is not the case. Anybody who is seeking a curriculum that is grounded in a specific faith tradition has been moved into private education or parochial education. I also have to admit, sadly, I'm going to cross off the civic function. As a social studies educator, it brings me great pain, but I have to admit that in the last several rounds of school reform, that has not been a priority. That, at best, I can say civic education is in the mix, but it is not in the driver's seat. So we're left then with 2 possibilities, the economic function of schooling or the self-actualization purpose of schooling. So in order to determine which of these 2 has the upper hand, we're actually going to turn to Horace Mann, who is the Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, 1837 to 1848. He's Massachusetts' first Secretary of Education. In fact, he's the first Secretary of Education in any state of the United States. That Massachusetts was the first to put in place the Department of Education, and as you may know, he institutes the policy of common schools throughout Massachusetts, other states in New England, and then the nation followed that. So, for example, this is a common school in Wyoming in the 1930s. So which of these 2 purposes does Horace Mann have in mind when he presents the case for marshaling the tremendous resources necessary to support the common school movement? And certainly at different times he will invoke different rationales, but one thing that I think has a lot of had resonance then and has resonance today is mentioned in his 1848 report to the Board of Education. So reading through this, he's describing the state of affairs in Massachusetts in 1848, and I invite you to consider the parallels between what he has in mind, what he is facing, and the prescriptions that he offers with what we talk about here now in the 21st century. Now, 2 or 3 things will doubtless be admitted to be true, beyond all controversy, in regard to Massachusetts. By its industrial condition and its business operations, it is exposed, far beyond any other state in the Union, to the fatal extremes of overgrown wealth and desperate poverty. According to population and territorial extent, there is far more capital in Massachusetts, capital which is movable and instantaneously available than in any other state in the Union. So when he says capital, you think jobs. That Massachusetts, they're saying, is vulnerable to jobs being relocated from Massachusetts into other states. When he points out the extremes of wealth and poverty, he's talking about social inequality, a concern that we face today in terms of the increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots. So again, we could strike out the word Massachusetts and substitute the United States. Let's now turn to the prescription that man offers in this situation. Nothing but universal education can counterwork this tendency to the domination of capital and the servility of labor. If education be equally diffused, it will draw property after it by the strongest of all attractions. So he's saying that an educated populace will necessarily be a prosperous populace. So I would say between the 2 rationales, if we go back to the birth of American public universal compulsory education, that Horace Mann is pretty clearly signaling us towards the economic rationale for American education. And looking elsewhere, if we see it in Massachusetts in 1848, and if we see it currently in current discussions of American education, can we see it at places in between, would be the question that a historian can ask. And I would say yes. So for example, in preparing this, happened to remember reading in Eric Hobsbawm, The Age of Capital, that American universities and technical academies were economically superior to the British ones because they actually provided a systematic education for engineers. They were superior to the French because they mass-produced engineers of adequate level instead of producing a few superbly intelligent and well-educated men. So note that he's describing the period 1848 to 1876, and that Lehigh University would in fact be one of these American universities and technical academies that he is commending for the mass production of an adequate engineer, which, coming from a British historian, I think we will count that as praise. In 1991, Lamar Alexander, then governor of Tennessee, as part of the National Government Association, writes that better schools mean better jobs. Unless states face these questions, Americans won't keep our high standard of living. To meet stiff competition from workers in the rest of the world, we must educate ourselves and our children as we never have before. So linking together the function of schooling with the economic purpose of serving the economy. In shifting to slightly more ominous terms, the National Defense Education Act of 1958, so following on the Sputnik satellite launch by the Soviet Union, that act opens with these words: the security of the nation requires the fullest development of the mental resources and technical skills of its young men and women. The present emergency demands that additional and more adequate educational opportunities be made available. The defense of this nation depends upon the mastery of modern techniques developed from complex scientific principles. Then more recently, in 1983, The Nation at Risk opens with perhaps the most famous formulation of this general line of thought. Our nation is at risk. Our once unchallenged preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technological innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world. So, throughout the time period then, from Massachusetts in the 1840s up until now in the early 21st century, we see a repeated linking of these 2 themes, and also an increasing concern. Economic anxiety brings out this demand, this call for schools to amp up their service of the economic function. So, all of this lets me look at the statements here from Race to the Top. Its first core competency goal, to prepare students to succeed in college and the workplace and to compete in the global economy. This actually sounds quite nuanced to me relative to the previous statements about the security of the nation and threats from outside. So you can put this statement into that historical context, but then as the historian, I say, well, we've seen this before. We've seen this concern brought forward in similar circumstances, and we've seen it linked to similar issues. So the question we're left with, is this, therefore, old wine served in a new bottle? Is this the same old economic concern or social insecurity brought forward and placed upon schools as they serve their social function? On the other hand, is the current emphasis on STEM education instead a new wine, radically different, trying to fit into the very, very old bottle of public schooling? And that is what our four panelists are going to discuss tonight. I can only tell you about the past, they're going to tell you about the future. So our four panelists are at the forefront of STEM policy and implementation, and they're going to share their experience and perspective working across international, national, and then down to local contexts. And I very much look forward to learning from them. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Alex Wiseman.
Well, it's a pleasure being here, and I think that situating our discussion in the historical context is actually really, really important, and I'm going to do a little bit of the same. Don't anyone ever say that comparativists don't have a historical lens as well. You know, my career in education started about 20 years ago when my wife saw an ad for the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program in the student newspaper. And we decided this would be a good opportunity. Why don't we try it? We went to Japan. I taught English in the Japanese junior high schools. And it was a really exciting experience for a lot of reasons. One of the main things, though, that I remember when we returned from Japan was that the very first questions I was asked by our family, by the teachers that I then ended up working with at Aztec High School in New Mexico, and others was, so you've been in Japan, you've seen what they were doing, and this is the early 90s. Japan was still a country that we were interested in learning about, and they were doing well economically, they were doing well academically, in fact they were killing us on international exams. And the question was, what can we learn from them? How do we fix our failing system? And that always struck me, and when I come to events like this, that is inevitably the question that I get. Well, you're the comparativist, you look at national systems worldwide, how do we fix what we're doing wrong? And I'm always struck by that question because I think that it approaches the issue of this global crisis in education and in STEM education in particular, perhaps from the wrong angle. I don't necessarily have a list of 5 steps to fixing all our problems. In fact, I dare say none of us have the definitive list. Although I think we probably have very good ideas, and we have examples of what does work and what doesn't work. And so when we think about that question, how do we fix what's wrong? I think maybe we should ask instead, why are we asking that question? Why are we assuming that the baseline is failure for American education? Why don't we start with a different type of understanding? Let me give you, at the time, 20 years ago, coming back, I still consider myself young. I was younger then. I thought, yeah, I've been in Japan. I've seen how they do it. They are outperforming the United States. They are doing things very differently than I've seen in American classrooms that I myself was taught. There have to be some things that I can take back with me. I've spent a while in classrooms that look just like this. And I said, all right, a couple of things. One is, I remember when I was in Japan that Japanese classrooms were student stable. In other words, the junior high school students stayed in the same classroom all day, and it was the teachers that rotated through. Now, what does that mean? Well, I started thinking about, well, how does that build a culture? How does that build a community? How does that strengthen their academic potential? What is it about that that has some sort of advantage? I remember that I would talk to people about how students in their classrooms organized themselves into groups called Hans. And they actually, when it was time to work on assignments, would turn their desks so that they were facing each other in their predetermined groups. And they worked in these groups throughout the year together. And I thought, well, there must be something there. That's the trick. This is the way that they work together. They have that organization already built into the way that they think about doing their exercises. That's going to fix it. And I remember talking about how the Japanese students that I worked with were really good at grammar. They were really good. They were better than I was at grammar. I consider myself pretty good. But they were horrible at solving problems in new situations. Absolutely horrible. Part of it was they were junior high school students, but I thought, well, this must be the solution. They are expert test takers. They aren't able to apply that information in new situations. And what I found was, when I was back in the United States now teaching in US classrooms in Aztec, New Mexico, I was having some similar problems. I was having some of the same observations. It, in many ways, was not as different as I had expected it to be. And so I started thinking, well, you know, the way that the Japanese were doing, at least the way that I saw them do it, it worked for them. It works somewhat, in some situations, the same way in my classroom in the United States. But I don't think that that is the answer, to just say, well, they did it, it works for them, it doesn't work for us all the time. It's more nuanced than that. And so, I think what we have to think about, what I have recognized as I've been studying education systems and their differences for now 20 years, is that when we're looking at what happens in classrooms worldwide, in STEM courses worldwide, the key is not necessarily figuring out what we can change in the school. Although there's some of that we want to do. But what I want to talk about is how we can think about aligning those school factors with non-school factors. It's in many cases, in fact, in my experience, almost all of the cases, how we put together the reform that happens inside our schools and classrooms with the context that happens outside, or what students bring in with them. All right. Well, Tom already set us on the right trail. Whenever I'm asked to talk, by the way, the other thing I'm always asked to mention is how there's a global crisis. And I have a little problem with the crisis agenda, and so let me talk about that. The history of crisis in U.S. education is long and storied, and there are a few moments that usually get highlighted. Tom already talked about Sputnik, the fact that the Soviets were beating us in the space race was enough to push national attention and a whole lot of money into thinking about how we can improve STEM education. And the rhetoric of STEM crisis, really, I think we can, in many ways, sort of kick it off with Sputnik. But it wasn't until A Nation at Risk that we really got it sort of cemented into our national discourse. And A Nation at Risk, I love it because it's full of quotes like this. Tom gave you some, I'm going to show you this one. I mean, this sort of national security-based fear that goes along with thinking about how our education system is underperforming is a huge, huge component to how we think about education and educational reform in STEM or any area. And this is a great example of how education continually gets siloed and then blamed and shamed for perceived national failings, whatever they might be. And every presidential administration since Reagan has had their own education statement. We'll remember A Nation at Risk, No Child Left Behind, and even President Obama has some skin in the game. He has said point blank that this is our generation's Sputnik moment. I like that. And that we need to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build the rest of the world. And the emphasis, both implied and overt, from all of these national education agendas is not on the arts, it's not on the humanities. It is squarely placed on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. And the implication over and over again is that America is failing somehow in its educational system. It is failing to actually do enough to prepare students who can take the reins, who can move our STEM system forward, who can innovate in technology and in business. The media certainly doesn't help. I've only got 2 examples up here. It's amazing what you can find. There's no end to stories about how we're not doing well in education. About 10 years ago, I was commissioned with a colleague to do a report for the National Academy of Science on the impact of at the time it was called the Third International Mathematics and Science Study, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. We don't call it the trends in international mathematics and science study. Our job was to tell the National Academy of Science if there was any impact from the United States participating in TIMSS, as it's called. And we spent 6 months interviewing people at the national level, at the state level, and at district and local levels about how they were using TIMSS, what they knew about TIMSS, how international data was being used to make decisions, etc., etc. And what we found was, I think, very interesting. We found that at the national level and at the highest state levels, people actually knew what TIMSS was. That was a step in the right direction. They actually knew that we were participating as a nation in internationally comparative assessments of mathematics and science. And they sometimes knew a little bit about what the results were. But as we went further down in the system towards the schools and the classrooms, over and over again, first of all, nobody knew what TIMS was. They'd never heard of it. They never knew that the data was publicly available, any of that. All they knew was, whenever somebody mentions how the United States is doing compared to other systems in the world, we're always the last. We're always worse. A little depressing. And part of my job then, I think, is to talk about how, you know, really, the story isn't all that bad. I'm not saying that it's all blue skies, but we have some moments that we can highlight. As John Holdren, Obama's science advisor and director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, has said, America needs a world-class STEM workforce to address the grand challenges of the 21st century. Now that's lofty talk. And we have to talk a little bit about what exactly those challenges might be. But we also need to remember that we do participate in the trends in international mathematics and science study. We do, as a country, participate in the Program for International Student Assessment. These are two of the largest international assessments of education that exist. PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, is overseen by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's based in Paris. The goal of the PISA is to help OECD member nations make decisions about their education system that will advance their economic productivity. Horace Mann would be proud. TIMS is overseen by the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement, which is a mouthful to say. It's located in Amsterdam. I'm going to focus on TIMS today for a couple of reasons. One is it specifically focuses on mathematics and science, whereas PISA will look at literacy and reading sometimes. TIMS is all about math and science. It's all STEM all the time. Secondly, TIMS is something that's been around for a while. Actually, earlier iterations of TIMS were the first international and the second international mathematics and science studies in the late 60s and the early 80s. And then TIMS really started in 1995, and we've had a TIMS every cycle since then. It's on a 4-year cycle. So we participate as a nation. There's a representative sample of American schools that participate every 4 years. It has a wealth of information that's available in it. There are math and science assessments for 4th graders and 8th graders. There are background questionnaires for students, for teachers, and for principals that give information from, who do you live with at home to how often do you teach numbers and geometry to your 8th grade classes. I mean, there's all sorts of background information. And when we want to talk about, and I'm asserting that we should be talking about, how we can align what happens in the school with what happens outside of the school to make real change. Using data like that we get in the TIMS is, I think, a really valuable tool for us. There we go. You're not supposed to be able to read that, so don't try to squint. What I do want to do, though, is show you that these are simply the rankings. And if you do squint, you can find the US in there. We're actually a little bit further up towards the top than most people assume. Now, you may have heard how well we're doing or we aren't doing, and definitely everyone is interested in rankings. When the initial press releases come out after the TIMS data, it has been cleaned and put together in some sort of coherent format. The reports are ready to roll out from the International Study Center, which, by the way, is based in Boston College, just a little bit up the road from us. The first thing that they talk about is ranking. Do we fall 3rd, 5th, 20th, 50th? Okay. And some countries actually track how their ranks change from cycle to cycle. And let me just tell you right now that that's not the right way to do it, for a lot of different reasons. For one, statistically speaking, that is not a very sound method for thinking about how well a whole educational system is performing. A much better way to do it is to think about groups of countries that are, if we just want to look at performance, just average student performance, that are statistically speaking not that different from each other. And there are 3 groups. There's a group at the very top that are significantly above the international mean. There's a group at the bottom that is significantly below, and you guessed it, there's the rest of us. So when we parse out rankings, it's really doing us a disservice. What we should be doing is thinking about who's at the very top, who's at the very bottom, and what do we look like with those people around us. And I'm happy to say that the United States falls squarely in the middle. We're really in that big middle group. Although if you like rankings, we've moved up. But statistically speaking, we're not very different from most other countries that participate in TIMSS. And it's the same in both math and science. There's a high group, a low group, and a middle group. Now, those countries that appear at the top of the rankings generally get the most attention from concerned policymakers, educators, people like me who study this kind of stuff. And these are the systems that we then call model systems. For example, at the top of the TIMSS Science Achievement Rankings are Singapore, Korea, and Finland. And if you haven't heard about Singapore, Korea, and Finland lately, you have not been paying attention, because everybody likes to talk about Singapore, Korea, and Finland. And in our search for evidence-based best practice information about STEM education, the teacher preparation, the curriculum, and the teaching methods in these countries are examined in great detail by researchers world over. I'm going to be speaking at an event in a couple of weeks, and they are actually flying in the Minister of Education from Finland to, I guess, bless us with his wisdom. It'll be interesting to hear what he has to say. And it's really interesting how we focus on these different countries and their systems. Now, each of these three systems have become sort of famous for particular things that they do. And when we look at these educational systems using this internationally comparative data, we often ignore all the same things. Like, we do a lot that's the same as Singapore, Korea, and Finland. A lot. It's shocking how much we do that's the same. But we highlight some things that are key differences. And let me just tell you what they are. The Singaporean and Finnish teachers have gotten a lot of attention because of the rigorous and standards-driven way that they train and certify their teachers. The emphasis is on expert content development and pedagogical practice. And there are numerous studies and programs that have been developed using examples from these countries to strengthen teacher preparation and professional development in the United States. Singapore, by the way, is probably the one that gets the most play, although Finland also has a very strong system. Singapore and Korea are highlighted for the culture of respect that education and teachers command in those countries, with the status of teachers being relatively higher than most other communities that are at that highest level of performance in TIMSS. Each of these model systems have had their curriculum scrutinized, and it's been shown that there is more focus and less repetition in STEM classrooms in Singapore, Korea, and Finland than in the United States. They tend to, well, the United States, this Bill Schmidt at Michigan State has said that the United States curriculum is a mile wide and an inch deep, meaning that we cover everything poorly or superficially. And that there's evidence that Singapore, Korea, and Finland, they go into much more depth with the topics that they teach. They're much more selective, and they build on topics consecutively. In other words, they pay very close attention to what needs to come first, and how do we build the topic on top of that the next year, and the next year, and so on. And then finally, Finland gets a lot of play. There's a guy named Pasi Sahlberg who has made the circuit talking about the Finnish education system. Their culture of education has been identified as largely equity-based. The point is that the Finns actually, they don't perform a whole lot different than the US on some parts of TIMSS, but on PISA, they shoot through the roof, because PISA and TIMSS measure slightly different things. Right? And so people started looking at what they did in their education system before they shot through the roof. And they had a whole load of equity-based reforms that they did. So trying to provide equal opportunities and content for students throughout Finland have been their agenda, and so people look at that really, really closely. So if I was going to be asked, if you were asking me, what do we need to do to fix our system? It would be very easy to say, here they are. I've laid it out for you. These are what the best systems in the world do. They prepare their teachers in a rigorous, standards-based way with an apprentice or an application model towards the end. They have a culture that values education, especially teachers and the professional status of teachers. They have a targeted and focused curriculum that builds on consecutive concepts. And they have equity-based reform throughout the system. Easy, right? We can do that. Well, the fact of the matter is, if we wanted to, we could look at those in the lowest performing area of TIMSS, and you know what? Many of them have very rigorous teacher preparation programs. They have higher status for teachers. They have a more focused curriculum than we do, and they have equity-based reform that we can't even begin to imagine in the United States. Right? So when we're trying to find that easy fix, it isn't there. I'm not saying these are bad things and that we shouldn't be doing them. Absolutely. But there's another way that we can think about the data. So let me just finish. What we can look at is we can look at the data a little more closely to look at variation within country. And when we look at variation within country, we can see where our strengths and weaknesses are. And we have certain strengths in the United States in terms of what we do cognitively and what we do in terms of content provision for our students. That at that sort of broad level gives us some insight into how we might want to actually reform our system. It doesn't mean that we're always comparing to what's going on in other countries, but it does mean that we're using that data in a way that comparatively targets specific areas for improvement in the United States.
So one question I want to ask to follow up on this is, looking at Singapore, Korea, and Finland, as a social studies educator, I hope that everybody knows that these are culturally very, very homogenous nations. And the United States, on the other hand, is very, very diverse. That the United States culture is an amalgamation of many traditions and many generations within each had an impact. Conversely, American education is traditionally very much assimilationist. That many go in and they come out a little bit more narrow. So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts after considering STEM education in these other environments, as you turn around and look at the United States, does STEM provide an opportunity to try to reconcile these two different influences of cultural diversity in the United States, but also the homogeneous nature of American school?
I think that there are opportunities for STEM education that certainly do provide that. However, I'm not sure that it's the STEM content specifically that does that. Although, I mean, some people will talk about how science and mathematics is in some ways an international language. It is something that can be approached from many different angles and still be understood by all. So that's certainly part of it. But I think that there is something that we need to consider about the way that our system is built in the United States that's important to consider. You mentioned all the different districts, by the way, Tom, that we have in Pennsylvania. And if we look across the United States, there's 15,000, some obnoxious number of independent school districts. We have the most decentralized system in the world. And so making decisions about how we're going to either improve STEM education or not really have to consider the context of each of those districts. And, I mean, we can start at the state level, but really we need to think about what's the community that's involved and how do we match the school factors with the non-school factors. It can be something as simple as thinking about what is the context and background for the teacher that is in the classroom versus the students. Lisa Delpit has talked about this when it comes to African American students and white teachers. Right? How do they fit together? What are some of the cultural elements that cause problems in terms of communication between the teacher and student, and what are some of the ways to overcome that?
So just as the analysis needs to be contextualized, the policy solutions will also need to be contextualized.
They do need to be contextualized. The difficulty is making a policy for every single district.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll turn now to Dr. Sharon Lynch.
Oh, is this going to do it on its own, or? Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate the invitation from the administration of the university and from the planning committee that organizes these talks. And I'd also like to recognize Alec Bodzin, who was my former master's degree student when he began to learn to teach science education at George Washington University way back in the day. So Al is an old friend and a dear colleague, and it's really a delight to be here tonight and to have him allow me to come and talk to you. I'm a professor at George Washington University, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about our research on inclusive STEM-focused schools. But I wanted to say that my parents were born and raised in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which not too far down the road. And although I grew up in Michigan, at the end of their lives, my parents moved back to Wilkes-Barre. And while you might not hear the Pennsylvania in my accent, you might hear it in some of my ideas because of my parents. Okay, so basically what I wanted to do tonight is give you this idea of opportunity structures and talk a little bit about it. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more about the economic climate and the prognosis for opportunity. And I wanted to offer that STEM education is at least part of the answer. And I wanted to talk about one of the research projects that we're working on, which are these inclusive STEM-focused schools. So the first thing is we want to talk about opportunity structures. So I'm going to slow this down a bit and ask you to think about something. And ask each of you in the room, as a person who's made it to this lecture tonight and is a thoughtful, educated person, how did it happen that you came to be sitting in this room today? And I want you to think of 3 critical factors, perhaps in your childhood or adolescence, that allowed you to be here. Name them. You don't have to say them aloud, but think about it. How did you get here today? What made the difference? Now, if you were going to ask me that question when I was about 6 or 7 or 8 years old, and I was a smart little kid, I did okay in school, my mother would have given me the answer, and she would have said, you go to the Catholic school, you listen to the nuns, you'll be fine. Okay? Now, as you grow a little older, life gets a little more complicated, and you begin to analyze what's happened a little differently. And I think I've spent about the last 10 years, if not 20, thinking about that. And I ran across this idea of these opportunity structures. And in opportunity structures, it refers to the notion that the chance to gain certain rewards or goals is shaped by the way a society or institution is organized or structured. In other words, it was proposed by a man by the name of Ken Roberts in 1968. He was a Brit. He studied juvenile delinquents in London. And what he realized pretty soon is that kids were making choices, these young people, based on opportunities in their neighborhoods. They weren't making the decisions based on what was given to them in schools, but what was close at hand, what was going to get them ahead. And at that time, the prevalent idea, and we hear this again in our country about the American dream. If you work hard, if you study hard, and you make good choices, you're going to get ahead. But what Roberts was really saying is it's a little more complicated than that. And what he was saying is that the direction and momentum of careers are derived from how opportunities are cumulatively structured. Friends, ease of access to different types of employments, the home, the environment, the peer group, and job opportunities. It includes things like distance from work, your qualifications, your informal contacts, what ethnic group or gender you belong to, and cyclical and structural factors in the labor force. So I have to say, as I got the tour of as I got the tour of Bethlehem today, I thought about these opportunity structures and the things in this environment that make choices a challenge. So in the last 40 years, what we've seen is 4 decades of widening of inequality of outcomes, that is to say income. I guess we all are aware of that. The middle class is shrinking. We're getting a larger proportion of people at the lower end. And not only have we a shrinking of outcomes, we have a shrinking of opportunities. This impedes economic recovery, and it's a growing threat to America. So it's not just a matter of social justice and doing good, it's the interconnection between opportunities and the economic prognosis. So I guess I would argue with Tom that while certainly the economy is driving STEM, there's a good group of us out there that really believe that self-actualization, or the chance to get ahead, is really, really important. You've got to be a happy, productive person. Children born to parents of limited means can't live up to their potential, and there are countries who do better. Germany, Canada, France, and Sweden are 3 examples of well-developed countries where they really do offer more opportunities to kids by the way things are structured within the schools. Now, there's at least 4 factors that can change things around, but it's clear that education is one, and we know that education in the United States is getting more expensive, i.e. student loans and that whole business and tuition. Okay. So that kind of gives you the background from where I'm coming from. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is moving it into STEM education, because it's clear that STEM education is definitely seen as a solution. So what is it? Well, originally, it was just an acronym: science, technology, engineering, and math. And there was no common definition. But we're actually using this definition in the work we're doing, and I really like it, and I'd like you to think about it. It's an interdisciplinary approach. They aren't separate disciplines, where rigorous academic concepts are coupled with real-world lessons as students apply science, technology, engineering, and math in contexts that make connections between school, community, work, and the global enterprise, enabling the development of STEM literacy, and with it the ability to compete in a new economy. Now, that definition was born in Pennsylvania, and it's the one we like a lot. And I think it's what the provost alluded to in his opening remarks when he talked about the why. It's the kind of STEM education that actually gives young people the opportunity to think why they're doing what they're doing. So that's our definition: interdisciplinary, real-world context. It gets people excited. It's got to be inspirational. They've got to know why they're doing it, and they've got to believe in it. So what we're looking at is a new kind of school, which is an inclusive STEM-focused school. And these schools are designed especially to create these opportunity structures. So the things that might be missing from a typical school or a typical community, these schools are thinking forcefully about changing. So what are they? Well, first of all, they have to self-identify as a STEM school. They are schools of choice. That means there's open admissions, often lotteries. Anybody can get in. So these are not the schools for the gifted and talented that we've had for centuries in this country. These are schools for any kid who really wants to focus on STEM. Think about that. That's really a huge difference. The goal is to increase participation of groups underrepresented in STEM and to provide high-quality learning experiences with special supports. And they want to link local economies, communities, colleges, universities. It's like the walls got torn down and they're using the resources that are there. They're smaller, they're more focused, and they're more personalized. So it's a new kind of school. Why are we seeing the rapid growth in these schools, especially for underrepresented populations, rather than focusing on historically top-performing students? All right, some more stats. Okay, we rank 29th out of 109 countries in the percent of 24-year-olds with mathematics or science degrees. The fastest growing ethnic groups in our country are the kids who are least represented in STEM degree programs. And until recently, the U.S. got away with bringing in people from outside the U.S. to make up these the positions, but that's becoming increasingly untenable. In terms of student and family views, this is from a Department of Commerce report, in the last decade, growth in STEM jobs was 3 times greater than non-STEM jobs, and they're projected to grow at least twice as fast in the next 10 years. STEM workers experience less joblessness, and they earn 26% more. And about 66% of the students cite intellectual challenge, good salaries, and job potential. And interestingly, parents see this as moving the country forward in terms of competitiveness and innovation. And then finally, you've heard this before, but just one more bit of it, the equity issues. We've said that there's growing inequality in the U.S. with fewer in the middle class. What you might not know is there's less social mobility than there has been in the past. And by social mobility means the chance to go jump up or go down. It's stagnating. And in the social mobility indices, we're just below Great Britain. We've gotten pretty stagnant. It's hard to move around. And schools with high proportions of minority kids generally have the fewest resources and teachers. So, if this is the problem, then, and you want more of the population interested and excited and able to do STEM at all levels, not just the PhD level, but at all levels, then how about a new experiment? How about trying one of these STEM-focused schools? So, our research effort is called Osprey, and we're looking at opportunity structures in 10 inclusive STEM-focused schools, and we're funded to look at the 10 schools for a case study. And I'll just quickly show you what we intend to do. All right, so first of all, we only get to select 10 schools, so we're going to select 10 of the ones that seem to be really functioning well. So we've got expert input. You know, we aren't doing random assignment. We're getting the ones that are really working well. And we're going to start with 10 critical components, which I'll show you for a minute, which we think might be in all those schools. This thing working. So, when we study these schools, I'm going to Colorado tomorrow. I'm going to be in a new school. The first thing we did is we looked at how the school is designed. What's on paper, what's on their website, what do they want to do? So we look at that, and then we visit the school. We bring a team in with 6 people for a week, and we look at how they're actually implementing the things that they said they want to do. And we're looking at student outcomes to see how the kids are doing. That would be a good thing, right? And then there's this business about the local context. You know, what's going on in that community that makes the school work, what's limiting things, that sort of thing. So remember, these schools are all over the United States. They aren't under any umbrella. Nobody's got control of them. It's a grassroots movement. Kind of interesting. So what we did is we tried to figure out what do we expect to be in these schools. There's no club, there's no society. So we read the literature and we hypothesized that there would be 10 things that we expected to find in these schools, but we don't know for sure. So that's what we're studying. So we aren't wandering into the school to see, oh, what's going on here. We're looking for these 10 things. And I think if you look at them, you can probably see that they make a lot of sense. But the breaking down of the barriers between the regular school day, using real-world STEM partnerships, these schools are letting kids into college as soon as they're ready, 9th grade, 10th grade, and so on. And these are the things that we'll be studying, and the things that are highlighted in yellow I'll have a little bit of a chance to talk about tonight. Okay. So, actually I'm doing pretty well. All right, so the first school we studied was Maynard, New Tech High in Maynard, Texas, and those are some of the kids. And this is the case study that we're at the point where we can reveal the name of the school and talk a little bit about it, but they're there. Okay, this is on a hot, flat, sunny plain outside of Austin. It's kind of rural and it's kind of suburban. And you can see that there's about 350 kids. 54% of the kids fall into that low SES free and reduced lunch category. 50% of the kids are the first in their families to have attended college. That's what they really like to recruit, the kids who've never had a family member who've ever attended college. Latino, Caucasian, African American, and down in Texas, not too many Asian Americans. So it's a really diverse school, huh? All right, now I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of the design dimensions. All right, so they're going to be preparing these first generation kids. It's inclusive, it's admission by application and lottery. And they do something called project-based learning, which if we had more time we could talk about. It's a great system in this school. And they're teaching, 21st century skills. And they want to build character, so it's not quite moral education, but they care a lot about character in this school. All right, so project-based learning is a system where everything they do from the time the kid gets there in 9th grade till the time they graduate, is based on 3-week projects that are all targeted at the Texas state standards. So they're still paying attention to the standards, but the kids are working in groups of 4 for 3 weeks on projects that are designed to teach them the standards in context. And they're always posed like, if you're a professional in the water treatment plant, what is it that you're going to do to solve this particular problem? So they're all placed in real-world projects. And this business about 21st century skills, you know, I thought good slogan, sounds nice. These kids actually do that because it turns out if you've worked in groups of 4 on projects through all your classes for 4 years, you begin to actually develop these skills and you can see them. And it's the skills that business and industry leaders say they want. The kids are beginning to do it. You can see it. So, implementation, what do we see when we went there? Well, there was a STEM-focused curriculum. They managed to get 5 years of science and math in 4 years by using a trimester system. They've got 2 years of engineering, and they really seem to understand the concepts better, I think because of the contextual base. They're doing the reform-based instructional strategies. They use cross-disciplinary courses. And the kids have to be able to demonstrate what they learned through performance assessments. Technology. This wasn't a really, really fancy tech school, but it's the best school I've ever seen in terms of the way they use the technology. How do all those projects get done? It's the technology that we use it together. They're using every kind of social media, a 1-to-1 computer ratio, and the assessments require technologies in use. You hear kids say, oh, another film, do I have to make another film? I've done that. The teaching staff is well prepared, and they are supported well for these kinds of things in terms of professional development. And I'd like to talk more about this, but I would simply say that from the time that these kids get into the school, the aim is to get them into college. The aim is not to get them into STEM careers, but to get them into college through the STEM careers. And through the STEM coursework. So it really is more of a self-actualization kind of approach rather than we're just creating new people for STEM industry. It's a STEM that's going to get them into college and help them to do well. But from there, they're on their own. So what about outcomes? A couple of slides. Let's see how this works. Okay, so the blue is Maynard New Tech High. That's the state of Texas. And this is the comprehensive high school next door. So what you can see that in every case, these regular kids chosen by lottery to get into the school are outperforming their counterparts at the state level and at that comprehensive high school next door. And this happens consistently. I could put pages in this, so it's not just a one-year fluke. The attendance rate is consistently around 100%. The dropout rate is nearly 0. This is an important idea. Because of these projects, the kids perform 65 speeches per year, times 4 years. They've done about 180 public speeches to members of the community by the time they graduate. The principal says if we can get these kids an interview with a college advisor, they're in because they can talk, they can explain, they know what they're doing, they know why they're doing it. They're really nice kids to be around. They come up to you, they talk about what they're doing, they know it. And you can see from this that you get really high completion rates, and they've traced it for years and years. So what I really wanted to say is that this is a school that's actually doing the work, and again, they're actually regular kids. And if you think about the big problem in American education, we might get better at a few kids at the top, but this is tackling the middle, and this is where most of our growth is. This is what's got to happen. It's a really small study. I can't tell you that this is the answer, but I can tell you that it's about as exciting a thing as I've seen. So the summary is that improved STEM education is the key to building the economy and reducing inequities. They're not only twin goods, they may actually be dependent on one another. That's important. Unless you knock out inequalities, you aren't going to stabilize this economy. So says Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate at Columbia University, on the economy. These are things that we have to work on. The states are developing STEM programs, and some of them are using these schools. And I think what the schools are really doing, these opportunity structures don't have to happen by accident. They take commitment, planning, and work by the school district and the whole community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for introducing me to the new concept of combining STEM education and social justice. That definitely is something I'm not seeing it through your work on integrated STEM high schools. You're seeing it spread. I think what I'm most interested in hearing about is the project work that the students at Maynard Technology High School are doing. Could you briefly share with us perhaps a project with great success? It's something that people might be interested in learning more about and following up on. And are there any examples of a project that really need to be rethought?
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is the teachers are always reworking these. There's something I didn't mention. There's a new Tech High network in California that provides the original curriculum and some projects. And then this school has taken off and run with it. One example was that it's a combined engineering and geometry course. So they had kids begin to do kind of a typical kind of thing where you begin to build a house using geometry, sketchpad, and that kind of thing. But when you see the kids work on it, you begin to see the engineering skills come in. And you begin to see them begin to understand the trig in ways that I never understood. It's because they're using the trig. They're using the geometry sketchpad to be able to figure out the walls, the wall widths, and that kind of thing. Now, is that a perfect one? No, but they're always tweaking them. And incidentally, they run the humanities courses with total eagerness in a project-based way. I mean, it's all through the school, for the whole 4 years.
Thank you very much. I'm just excited to hear that trigonometry is good for something other than answering problems on the test, which is as far as I got. So, thank you very much, Dr. Lynch.
Thank you. I always enjoy coming and speaking, not only so I can share what we've learned, but also because I always learn from the people around me. So this has already been very interesting. I'm happy to be here with you today to share some thoughts about the E, engineering, in STEM, particularly as it relates to math, science, and technology. For years, the emphasis has been placed on the science and the math in STEM, leaving the technology and the engineering for later grades, if they were ever taught. But it's possible, and I would argue preferable, to infuse engineering starting in elementary school. My team and I have been working closely with teachers for over a decade on this challenge. In 2003, my team and I began work on a 20-unit elementary engineering curriculum, appropriately called Engineering is Elementary. This curriculum is now used in all 50 states by 44,000 teachers and has reached 3.9 million students. As we geared up to create the materials, we looked to the educational literature to understand a bit more about kids' conceptions of engineers and engineering, only to find there wasn't one. Therefore, we decided we needed to gather some information about how kids were thinking about engineers and engineering. So we conducted some research. To get a sense of children's concepts of engineers and engineering, we began by asking over 700 children to draw us a picture of an engineer at work. We also asked them to describe in words what they had drawn. Let's see what kids thought. A number of kids thought that engineers are construction workers. They build buildings, bridges, and roads. Note that they are building, not designing these structures. Engineers are also auto mechanics. They're the people you bring your car to when it's broken or needs an oil change. From a child's perspective, this makes sense. Engineering is a new word for many of them. it contains the word engine. For most kids, the thing that they know best that has an engine is a car. So it's not surprising they associate cars and engineering. A number of students depicted engineers using or fixing computers. They are the people that you call when your computer is broken. Again, they're not designing them, they're fixing them. And finally, with the younger kids, we see pictures of trains. There are some train engineers too, not the engineers we're focused on, no. Through this and a number of subsequent studies, we've learned that students don't have a very accurate or complete understanding of what engineers do. We set about to change this by introducing engineering to K-12 students in schools. And we're doing it with I call them the teeny tinies because I used to work in high school, so we're at the other end now. Why engineering? There are a number of reasons that we think it makes sense to include engineering in elementary, middle, and high schools. First, we see technological literacy as a basic 21st century literacy. We spend over 98% of our time interacting with the human-made world. The clothes we wear, the building we sit in. I mean, if we didn't have the human-made world, we'd be standing naked right now, probably in a forest. I think that's probably the native fauna here. But we don't learn about it at all in schools. We learn a lot about science, but nothing about the human-made world. So we really feel that it's important for students to understand something about how this world came to be. Engineering also helps to make the math and the science that students are learning relevant. In engineering, as Dr. Lynch just mentioned, children apply the math and science concepts and skills that they are learning to solve real problems. So all of a sudden, it starts to become a little bit more interesting and memorable. Engineering, as has been mentioned, helps to build and reinforce those 21st century skills like communication, teamwork, and problem solving. It also increases students' awareness of and access to careers. If you have no idea what engineering is, you probably won't even consider it. So we're trying to at least put it on the radar screen and help students to have an accurate understanding of what they do. And finally, engineering has just become part of the new frameworks for K-12 science education. As we started to think about developing new curriculum, we asked practicing teachers for advice about how to integrate this new subject. The strongest message they expressed was that to include engineering in their already packed curriculum, it must integrate with content they already teach. So we thought about that and chose a subject with many connections to engineering, science, as the primary integrator. EIE began with a list of the 20 most commonly taught science topics at the elementary level, which you'll see on the left-hand side. Each of our units integrates with one of these. Helping children to see the links between the STEM fields is a core commitment of our program. In EIE, kids use the science they are learning in science class, as well as mathematics, to solve their engineering design problems. We set each unit in a different country in the world, and we chose an engineering field, environmental, agricultural, aerospace, to focus on in each unit. With these constraints in hand, we set about choosing a technology the kids would engineer, and then developed a set of lessons for each. In addition to integrating with other disciplines, our teacher consultants also indicated that it would be very helpful if each unit had a similar structure. So our materials all share a common four-lesson structure. From the beginning, one of the goals of EIE was to create materials that were attractive and engaging to all students. To do this, we believed that we needed to connect students' learning to a real-world context. So each of our units begins with a storybook. It's elementary school. In each story, a child somewhere in the world encounters a problem that he or she solves using the engineering design process. Classroom students will tackle the same challenge. This allows us to immediately set the engineering activity the children will do in their larger context. It also helps us to connect to literacy and social studies. This was a great decision. We've seen again and again that the children are drawn into the activities by the stories. Today I'd like to give you a quick glimpse into two of the units to get a sense of what engineering might look like in an elementary classroom. The first unit is just passing through. This unit reinforces the science of organisms and their needs and features the field of bioengineering. The second the attraction is obvious. In this unit, students reinforce their understandings of the science of magnets as they learn more about transportation engineering. In Juan Daniel's Football Frog, the story for the bioengineering unit, Juan Daniel, a boy from El Salvador who loves football, or as we know it, soccer, finds a frog who is out of his native rainforest and is hopping around the edge of a dusty football field. The frog inspires Juan Daniel to overcome an injury and lead his team to football victory. Juan Daniel decides he wants to bring the frog to his championship game. However, he realizes the frog is not healthy and needs some assistance. With the help of some visiting bioengineers, we always have an engineer that miraculously appear just when needed, he learns that the frog's skin is a membrane that needs to be kept moist. He works to design an artificial membrane that will help his frog to survive the dry heat as it sits on the sideline of the final game. In the book Hikaru's Toy Troubles, we recount a story of a boy living in Japan who is trying to help his parents draw customers to their toy store because a new rival chain has opened across town. As he talks with his neighbor, a transportation engineer, about the maglev system she is engineering, he has an idea about how he might create a similar, smaller structure to spice up visitors' experiences and thus draw customers to his family store. So EIE dedicates the first lesson, the story, to helping kids understand the big goal for their activity and why they would want to engage with it. It's that why question again. It lays out the engineering challenge that the students are going to be exploring. Now they have a goal in mind. Hopefully they are even interested or possibly excited by it. In our second lesson, the children gain a broader view of the type of work of engineering that's featured in the unit. They engage in a short activity that demonstrates another type of project, different from the design challenge, that engineers working in that field might address. For example, in our bioengineering unit, students consider how natural objects have inspired human-made technologies. They consider function as they try to match the natural inspiration and the human-made technology. In the transportation engineering unit, kids act as transportation engineers as they think about how to engineer an intersection. As they drive their cars, they consider the safety features that will help the traffic flow more smoothly, as well as protect the pedestrians. In the third lesson of our units, children return to the design challenge that was described in the storybook. We want kids to understand that math and science are two tools they can use to solve problems. Many engineers constantly use math and science to improve their designs. We wanted to make sure that students experienced the interconnectedness of these fields. If students apply their science and math knowledge to solve a problem, they are much more likely to remember it because they are using and manipulating it. One challenge of doing work at the elementary level is that unlike real engineers, 7-year-olds do not have years of scientific study to draw upon. But we want them to make the links between science and what they are doing. So we needed to ensure that they are gathering scientific data that would inform their work as they began to develop their solutions. In lesson 3, children think about what they know already about the challenge and the science behind the challenge, and gather data about materials and their properties. They will draw upon these lessons, or these learnings from lesson 3 as they engage in the design challenge in lesson 4. So in the bioengineering unit, the kids are going to be engineering a model membrane that keeps a frog moist, that lets a certain amount of water pass through the membrane in a given time without letting too much water through. In the first part of lesson 3, the students engage in an investigation to understand more about how membranes work. They examine raisins, whose skin are a membrane, that have been soaked in water for varying amounts of time. And they look at raisins that have been soaked in water with sand. By dissecting the raisins, they learn that membranes let certain things through them, and that the passage through the membrane occurs slowly over time. In the second part of lesson 3, the kids start to think about what materials, aluminum foil with small holes, felt, cheesecloth, and sponges, might best be used in their membrane design. Let's see what this looks like in a real classroom. As you'll see in this video, they engage in another inquiry-based exploration. Observe as they make predictions, like good scientists and engineers, and then test them using controlled experiments.
What are your predictions before we do it? Who's got a prediction before we do this? Vivian, what's your prediction? Vivian thinks something, Janet. I think some might trip through it. Joa. A little. And Kendra.
I think because it's like paper, it's just going to go through.
You think it's like paper? Okay, here we go. Go.
That's it?
It's not a lot. Let's move on to the felt. Did anybody do this? I'd always love to know this. Does anybody have a prediction about this material? Victoria?
I think it's going to go through a lot.
Why do you think it's going to go through a lot?
Because it's like this, like a material that water would go through.
Why do you say it's a material that water would go through? I think that's a good statement. Why do you say that?
It's like almost extreme.
Oh, it's like a string. 1, 2, 3, 4. Look at that! Congratulations, engineers. You just completed the first big step in making a model membrane. Awesome job.
The students are not just approaching this activity as a science lesson. Rather, they are learning about how materials absorb, hold, and release liquids, so they can apply their knowledge as they tackle a design challenge. The information about materials is key to keeping their frog healthy. You might have also noted what Jean, the teacher, says at the end. She refers to her students as engineers. Her students are working as bioengineers, at a level that is, of course, developmentally appropriate. She wants them to build their identity as engineers. In the transportation engineering unit, the children similarly investigate magnets to understand more about how magnets work, so they can apply this knowledge to create a maglev system in Lesson 4, the design challenge. Lesson 4 focuses on problem solving, which is perhaps the core practice of engineering. Accordingly, a central goal of K-12 engineering education, and thus EIE, is to develop problem solving and innovation in children. As engineers work through a problem, their approach can be generalized into a series of steps called the engineering design process. Similar to the scientific method, this sequence is not absolute or linear. Rather, it is a tool that can guide the work of designers. To help scaffold children as they engage in engineering, EIE has developed a 5-step engineering design process. Ask, imagine, plan, create, and improve. Our process only has 5 steps because our elementary teacher consultants indicated that we could only have one hand of steps, or 5, or their kids would not remember it. As students get older, the process might include more steps, 8, 10, 12, but the intent remains the same. EIE has the students engage in a cycle, hopefully 2 or more cycles, of the engineering design process in Lesson 4. In the membranes unit, children will use the 5 steps to design a model membrane to keep the frog moist by letting a 1/4 cup of water through in 24 hours. Let's see what the engineering design challenge for magnets looks like. Here you'll notice the students call upon what they have learned about the properties of magnets in their science class and the previous engineering lessons. Their task? To design a model maglev train. As they focus on making their levitation system work, they recognize that success is based in science. In order to float, their magnets need to repel, not attract. They need to align the poles with this in mind. And to do that, they need to understand where the poles are on the magnets they are using. He's working on it. There it goes.
Connecting or repelling. Check if that's repelling or connecting. Just connecting. The magnet system. Where it looks like it's attracting me. But what I think is happening is this side here is like a different hole than this. So it's trying to slide over.
Okay.
On this one it's howling, but it's connecting on this one.
Okay, so
It's not actually getting straight. Yeah, it's trying to go like that. So if we made it a little bit wider and lost some of the magnets that go run through the middle, it would work better. Would we improve?
I love how the kid who had nothing to say is the way. That's good. Again, the students here are using what they have learned in science to try to solve a problem. When the students were troubleshooting, trying to figure out why their vehicle wasn't levitating, they had to take a closer look at the magnets they were using. As one of the boys explained to the teacher, the side strip of the magnet exposes a different pole than the face, which tends to make the vehicle twist. Getting kids to engage in this level of close observation can be difficult to achieve. But in engineering, it is often easy because the work the kids are doing requires it. The clip also highlights another feature, critical aspect of engineering, highly valued by engineers. Failure is a necessary, inherent part of engineering that invites subsequent, improved designs. Designs can always be improved. Embracing failure as a necessary part of the engineering design process can be a new experience for students. Instead of being wrong, failure is cast as a critical part of the process from which all engineers learn. A number of teachers and students, as we see in these quotes, have reported to us that students readily embrace the opportunity to continually hone their thinking and solutions, requesting the chance to continue to work to improve their designs before and after school, during recess, and over holidays. Instead of worrying about being wrong or appearing stupid, students focus on learning from their failed attempts as part of an iterative process they engage in to create a feasible solution. The iterative nature of the engineering design process means students keep analyzing their tests to determine how they might improve their solution a bit more in the next design. A student doesn't fail, a particular design fails, and in so doing, hopefully sparks a set of new, improved ideas. So is it working? Over the past decade, we've been collecting data to study how our work has impacted children. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of assessments from children and their educators. Overall, we find that when we compare children who are using EIE to students who do not, but study the same science concepts, the kids who are getting EIE perform significantly better on questions about engineering, technology, and science than their non-EIE peers. We have also found that children who use EIE with their science are more likely than their peers just studying science to indicate that they are interested in engineering as a career. Finally, teachers report that interest, engagement, and performance of students from underrepresented and underserved groups are enhanced when using EIE as compared to science or school in general. We have a lot more to learn. We hope that as a result of their introduction to EIE, or engineering more generally, students develop their creativity and persistence and become the innovative problem solvers of the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your presentation focused mostly on student outcomes, but I know that you spend a lot of time working with teachers and introducing this curriculum to them. And we can see the enthusiasm that the kids had in doing this, but I'm wondering if you had any sort of aha moments with adults, because after all, the concept of failure is not a cozy one to classroom teachers. Yes, the design fails, but the lesson must succeed. So what are some of the barriers or challenges, and then what have you done to overcome those working with adults?
I think one of the biggest challenges with the teachers is that most people do not become an elementary school teacher because they love science. So we have a bit of a challenge if you're kind of afraid of science, and that would be a generous term. The idea that you would teach engineering for many people is absolutely terrifying until they see what it looks like.
And then we say to the teachers, you know everything about engineering that you need to know, you've just never labeled it as engineering. And most kids could tell you with a sponge or, aluminum foil is going to let the water go through faster. So the knowledge itself is pretty easy once they have a sense that we're not asking them to solve calculus problems. The second piece, as you alluded to, that's very new for many teachers, not all teachers, is the idea that you're dealing with many solutions. There's no single correct answer. There's many solutions that work, and you're always trying to make it better, but our teacher's guide does not have solutions for them. There could be anyone. I've seen these challenges. There are, 700-900 different ways that kids can do it. And so you have to sort of be freed from the idea that what you're looking for is a right answer. And instead you're trying to scaffold kids through by asking a set of questions and then having them look back to the criteria. And once sort of teachers can make that switch to that kind of teaching, they find it incredibly freeing. And we always say the kids are actually the biggest advocate because once they get a sense of it, they start asking the teachers and begging the teachers to do more of it. And so we have many teachers who use engineering as the punishment when the kids misbehave, they lose their engineering time. So it's the kids that drive the teachers, but once the teachers try it, they also see the kids are really engaged. So it does require some differences in teaching, and they also tell us that having done it in engineering, they then start to bring it back and open up a lot of those other subjects that are much more locked down sometimes.
I'm very impressed by the transformative possibilities here. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bodzin.
Good evening, and thank you for coming tonight. I'm very humbled and honored to be here. I look around, I see many of my heroes, and these are the classroom teachers that are working with kids on a daily basis. And so thanks for coming tonight. And what I'm going to do tonight is talk about geospatial technologies. Now some of you do not know what geospatial technologies are. I bet you do. How many people ever use Google Earth? Let me see a show of hands. Google Earth users. All right, excellent. How many people have ever used a Garmin in your car? I don't have a Garmin. A lot of you did great. Those are all geospatial technologies. How many people have a cell phone or an iPod touch device that has some kind of map on it that you can click on it and it gives you some kind of information underneath it? A lot of people do great. That's also geospatial technology. So you're all familiar with what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to focus on our design, development, curriculum projects we have in school districts. And I want to acknowledge our support from NASA, National Science Foundation, and Toyota USA Foundation, who, without their support, this work that we've been doing here at Lehigh cannot happen. This is middle school curriculum that I'm going to be talking about, and I'm talking about full curriculum for 3 projects. One's an 8-week energy unit, a 4-week climate change unit, a 4-week land use change unit, and then we have new tectonics, 7 web GIS investigations. GIS is Geographic Information Systems. These are interactive maps with data underneath it. And this is a picture of our website right here. I also want to acknowledge our team. At Lehigh, we have a truly interdisciplinary team of science educators, scientists, GIS programmers, wonderful doctoral students with Earth Environmental Sciences and the Teaching, Learning, and Technology program here. And most important in our people in our group are classroom teachers. We have a design partnership model because in order for this to be effective and work in a diversity of classrooms, the teachers need to tell us what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be changed, and why. We use a series of frameworks and design principles that really focus on motivational learning contexts of children, of middle school kids in diverse settings, and how to use visualizations to focus on geospatial thinking and reasoning. We use inquiry-based learning, so a lot of the activities and examples I'll show you focus on driving investigative questions where there's some type of data to be analyzed or some problem to solve with that data. Also, a highlight of our feature is we realize teachers are very busy. They can't spend 2 summers going to a professional development training to learn about new technologies and new content. So we have embedded professional development that are educated for the teachers. All right, some of the features that you'll see tonight that we focus on are interface designs. GIS is actually a technology. We work with our programmers and interface people to customize it to be a learning technology so that middle school children can use the system and get at the data to do the investigations. We also provide content and pedagogical supports for teachers for the investigations. And what's really new for our Tectonics project here is we're now using a new JavaScript web GIS so that the stuff I'm going to show you, if you have an iPad mini, or another tablet device from somebody else, if it works on it, it works on my daughter's iPhone. She's got the iPhone 5. I don't know why you want to use it on the iPhone 5, but my daughter can do it. Everything that we do is research-based. We prototype everything in diverse classrooms. We make modifications. Our group comes in with field observations. We work with the teachers in terms of analyzing the data, what it tells us. We then pilot test in a much larger number of classrooms, and then we field test in complete school districts. Okay, in terms of support materials, what we have there's video tutorials that walk teachers through the investigations that focus on the spatial thinking patterns, the investigations themselves, and also on the tool use. And so, in addition to tutorials, you also have content pages. This is a picture from energy curriculum on wind energy, so it's text and graphics, and also in terms, these are from the teacher guides in terms of how to use some of the technologies and the interfaces. All right, this is one of the web GIS, the first one actually, first investigation, where's the nearest hazard to my location? And these are layers up here that are kind of checked up. What you're seeing here, this is the plate boundaries layers. These yellow dots are earthquakes. In 2008, it's a 3-year data set from 2008 to 2011. The triangles are volcanoes. And just looking at this, there's some patterns that you see. This is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and what you see are earthquakes are on the plate boundaries. These triangles are volcanoes, and what you see with the pattern of volcanoes is volcanoes are not on plate boundaries, they're near plate boundaries. One of the major misconceptions in the literature is that kids think that volcanoes are also on plate boundaries, like earthquakes. When you boot up this web GIS, a dot appears, and that's your location. That's Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So if you were booting this up, this web GIS, loading it in California, that dot would appear up here. And what you're seeing in terms of the background color is, this is the seismic hazard risk. So here's a key here. When you see these green colors, it means low seismic hazard. You'll see a lot of earthquakes. If you're actually to take off some of these layers underneath California, where all these hazards are, you'd start seeing red colors over here. There's an interactive query feature, so we could actually display earthquakes by fault type or depth. There's a series of tools like draw, measure tools. I'll show you a few of these features in a minute. And then we have different study areas for different investigations, such as the San Andreas fault area, and then we can link to additional data. All right, so this investigation, how does thermal energy move around the world? What I'm doing here is I'm clicking on the plate boundaries. I'm going to show you volcanoes here. I can click on a volcano, and what that does is that will give me some additional data. So latitude, longitude, the type of volcano. If I want to link to get a picture of it, I can go to the Smithsonian Institution. So next thing I'm going to do is click on, take these off, and then click on the age of the ocean floor. And there's a pattern there. And what you see is red is young ocean floor, and down here is older ocean floor. And if you look here at the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, there's definitely a pattern. Right on the ridge, you happen to see younger ocean floor. Now, I'm going to draw a profile, an elevation profile, and as I draw that line across the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, I have this dynamic profile that when I drop my cursor around here, it tells me what the elevation is. And what I learned from this is that there's another spatial pattern here, where there is hot plates, hot earth, I've got lower elevation. Now what I'm going to do is drape on another layer called surface heat flow. So this is hot parts of the mantle. And notice that it drapes over the edge of the ocean floor layer. This is what happens with GIS, it's got a lot of colors. So we've actually embedded a swipe tool, and we've checked the surface heat flow layer, and we can just gradually swipe that over. And now we can, by going back and forth, see the pattern. Young is old, young ocean floor is, sorry. The pattern here is that young ocean floor is hot and old is cold. All right, so let's see, that kind of stop there. Let's move on to another investigation. This is what happens when plates slide past one another. So this is the Charlie Gibbs fracture zone. This green plate boundary is a divergent plate boundary, and this plate boundary here is a transform boundary. And what students do is there's tools where they actually get scaffolded for this investigation to figure out and draw the motions of the plates. So here they're spreading apart, and then over here they're spreading apart, and they move into the transform boundary. What you typically see at the edge of the ocean floor, see how it's sort of symmetrical, straight down here? But when you start going over the transform boundary, it starts to offset, and that's another spatial pattern. Also in this WebGIS, if you actually go online and look at this, there's embedded videos that kind of show you the plate motions to help students, help drive home the concept to the students. All right, what happens when plates converge or come together? And this is at the Aleutian Trench, and just to orient yourself here, this is the Pacific Plate in the Pacific Ocean. This is the North American Plate. And this is a transect line. What you're seeing is triangles are volcanoes, earthquakes are circles, and this line corresponds to this slab depth right here, this angle of subducting slab depth. That's again, when plates collide, one plate subducts underneath, it creates an angle. This is the Pacific Plate. Remember, this is the Pacific Plate. This here is the North American Plate on this side. And just like that elevation profile, when a student drags their cursor here or on here, so they can see the corresponding location. Interesting thing here. When you see volcanoes from a top-down view, underneath it, the volcano is sitting here on the North American Plate, there are these deep earthquakes. And those deep earthquakes are actually down the North American Plate, but they're on the Pacific Plate. Now, we can compare, the students can actually compare subduction zones between an ocean-ocean collision, that's one that you just saw at the Aka Islands on the left, to the ocean-continent position, an ocean-continent collision. And there's a pattern there. You can see that the subducting slab depth angle is much different between the two types of converging plate boundaries. All right, this is one of the investigations from our energy curriculum. Where's the best place to locate a new wind farm? This is a map of Pennsylvania. And what the students do here is they're analyzing wind potential and land use to try to figure out where's the best place of 15 different locations. These are different wind farm locations. Some are actual places, some are fictitious, and some are places where we wanted to put people wanted to put wind farms in Pennsylvania. And so this right here is a measure of wind potential, the colors. You can do it in wind speed. And if you look at the pattern here, the colors, what you're looking for is for red or orange. This is where you get the best sustained wind in miles per hour. Now, where is that in Pennsylvania? Just by looking at this map, there's a pattern. Right up here, right? Lake Erie. So it's got the most sustained winds up there in Lake Erie. And so what the students do is they investigate and they zoom in on this and they take off the layers and look at the land use over there and decide where's the best place to put the wind farm, either in Pennsylvania. And then they have the second part to look in the greater Lehigh Valley area for wind farm potential. Remember, this is a 40-day curriculum unit, and the culminating activity is the island habitats activity. And in this, student groups, they work in groups, are chief energy officers for one of 3 provinces. There's 3 provinces on this island. They've been tasked with figuring out what we should be doing with the energy profile for their province for the next 50 years. Now this, there's all this data here. Remember, in this 40-day curriculum, we're learning about all the sustainable energies, all the fossil fuels, all the renewable energies, and about how energy is being generated, the infrastructure needed to get from power plant to consumer to get to serve cities. So what you're looking at here is all the infrastructure. You see the cities, you see pipelines, you see major roads, you see railroads, the electrical grid. Because without these things, you can't get the energy from the power plant to the consumer. Here are others from different layers, and not all provinces are created equally. In fact, in the activity, what we've done is we've actually differentiated these because we know in the classrooms, not all students learn at the same level. Some students are more challenged than others, so there's one province that you give those students to figure out for them. How are we doing on time? All right, great. All right, so what you see here are the fossil fuel resources, geothermal, different land cover. So some provinces are going to be better for planting and growing switchgrass for biofuels. Others with percent sunshine might be better for putting solar farms. Others might be better for putting wind farms. Others might be better, there are tidal ranges for tidal plants. And some provinces have better rivers with elevation changes to actually place a dam. This is climate change, the Google Earth activity, looking at sea ice extent. What the students do in Google Earth is actually use a measuring tool and measure the length and the width of a continuous ice sheet. This is from the 1979 data. They actually calculate that data, and they click on this other link, and when they do the measurement, this whole area is actually shrinking. And so they're figuring out, actually looking at scientific evidence of climate change, just like the scientists here in Stepsfield actually use for their research. And then this right here is another part of the Future Worlds where in this activity, students are looking at the effects of 1 meter sea level rise and 2 meter sea level rise at 5 different areas. So this is a place I think many of you are familiar with. This is Wildwood, right? Anybody been to Wildwood, New Jersey? Let's see, show of hands. All right, excellent. All right, supposed to be the longest beach. So this is a Google Earth path, and that corresponds to this elevation profile that you can easily display in Google Earth, and we actually set this. And what you're seeing here, this is 0 meters and 2 meter line right here, and this is showing this point right here, latitude and longitude, corresponding to this point here, which says 0 meters at 5 kilometers in. So this area from here to here corresponds to this area here to here. So if we had sea level rise of 1 meter, guess what? Your real estate's kaput. But that's all right. Governor Christie's going to build huge seawalls, so everything's going to be okay when they start that legislation. So it's a very interesting activity, especially when you go into New Orleans and see that there's over 150 kilometers that would be underwater with 1 meter of sea level rise. All right, does it work? Yeah, we're finding our data is showing yes, this is effective. We're seeing that students are learning geospatial thinking and reasoning skills applied to content area knowledge. We're seeing that we have a study we conducted where the students had enhanced geospatial thinking skills and learned energy content better than students in the same grade level, comparative schools using the business as usual curriculum. And that also with the teachers, the educative curriculum materials are effective for the teachers to become comfortable and confident with actually using these technologies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there, and here's the web address of your teacher. That's the login and the password to access all the assessments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you presented some data on student outcomes in terms of learning, but as a social studies educator, I'm actually interested in behavior of citizens. So I'm curious, have you observed anything or collected any data as far as some of the attitudes that students have as they meet these units?
Yes, we actually did. We conducted a study 2 years ago with this here at the Bethlehem Area School District during the field testing stage. And we actually have a valid reliable instrument that measures student attitudes towards energy conservation practices and their behavior. We did a pre-post test, and we actually had a comparison group with it. And what we found was the students that used this curriculum overall had a little bit of a gain. It was statistically significant. So, you know, it wasn't like huge numbers, but it was a little bit better. But we do know from the literature with environmental attitudes and behaviors, it takes a longer period of time than well, they usually say it takes years to actually institute change. We were really happy that there was some behavior changes. And there's an activity in the curriculum, and what happens in the curriculum is the students, this is on the second day, they actually do a personal and household energy audit, where they look at all the different energy consumption behaviors you do, everything from leaving your vampire appliances plugged in. Y'all know what that is, some of y'all may not know. When you have like your cell phone charger plugged in, and you're not using it, or you have your Wii console on, the gaming console, that's called an energy vampire appliance because it's sucking out energy and using energy. So what we found was that students at the end of the, reported to us when they did they revisited this energy audit in week 6 of the curriculum, and they started leaving the Wii games plugged in less, and the energy vampire things not used as much, and turning off the lights more in the house. So we're, from the students, again, this comes from the students and their reported data.
So imagine the effect size of the team that science curriculum with the social studies efforts to really engage students. So you introduced us to many, many technologies that may be new to folks in the audience. As you look ahead over the next 5 or 10 years, in terms of the technologies that are entering into American classrooms, but also American households and regular consumer use, what do you think is going to be especially important in terms of STEM education, but also more broadly in science?
Yeah, I really think right now, what I'm seeing is really 10 years from now, I don't know what 10 years is going to look like, because I think about what's happened in the last 10 years, but in my house right now, my daughter's got the iPhone 5, my wife's got the iPad, my daughter's birthday is tomorrow, she's getting the iPad mini, I have the iPod Touch, but we have these devices now, and there's opportunity now where we could actually program and develop to go outside with our students, gather data. There's all kinds of real-life data that we need to be doing in science, whether it be walking outside and measuring air quality data, or doing population counts, which we could do with young elementary kids, and contributing that to databases. The capability is there today where we can, again, with these types of interfaces, design a customized interface where the school, let's just say this, right now the issue with this stuff, mobile technology, is cost in the schools. Schools don't have the money to pay for all this stuff. But the cost of these devices, like the iPad mini and other tablet devices, is low. We can go out, we can gather data, take pictures, label, put probes into this, and then we can walk into a school building, tap into the school network, and then sync that data with a much larger database using a GIS system that we can then query and investigate our data to solve real-world problems. Some of this is in the early process and stages right now. National Geographic has a wonderful citizen science project going on right now, and they're looking at different interfaces and different tools to help with kids understanding the data. But I think right now, 10 years from now, it's funny, we're sort of reinventing the wheel, I think, in science education. There was this thing called network science that we did when I was a classroom teacher, where we would get pill bugs and do all these experiments, and we'd share pill bugs with 10, 15 other classrooms around the country, and then through NSFnet, FredNet, text mail and stuff like that, they would share the data and synthesize this. But now the capability is that we could put this data with nice customized interfaces, and kids could have their data contribute to science.
So taking data collection and analysis and distribution and making it seamless between classrooms and field settings and even across school units.
Yeah, that's where I would, with this new, with the next generation science standards, as we start implementing this, that's what I really would like to see happen in 10 years from now.
Very much looking forward to seeing it. And I thank our panelists for bringing us here tonight. To the organizers of the Advisory Council, we have contact information for our presenters available to you if you wish to follow up with them. And for those of you who need to follow up regarding Act 48 information, the email addresses for Lisa and Carly are up there, and they should also be up also. Thank you again. Good night.